Welcome back, everybody. This is Edwin, the Magic Engineer, and I'm finally back to tell you guys about my Temporal Stasis build. Actually, I'm very excited about this build. So, like my last video I just did, where I was talking about how Time Vault, this little beauty right here, actually got unrestricted, and you can now have up to 4 of them in your deck for Swedish and for Atlantic rules, and maybe at some point Eternal Central also. All for the old school format, which is only the first editions that were ever printed. There's a lot of speculation both directions that the card is way too overpowered, it's going to break the format, and there's other people saying, well, a lot of people given the chance won't play multiples of them anyways. This deck that I'm going to show you is definitely one where you would. In fact, this is probably one of the default places people would assume that this card would be multiplied up in the actual deck list. So you guys might remember, I did all my Turbo Stasis videos where I did a different kind of take on Stasis, not the traditional one that was like white, blue, sit back, be very countermeasure, you know, stop people. Then once things were locked down, then you could finally play Stasis and you could just maintain a lock and then the game would eventually end. And I changed it around to play a more aggressive one that was actually going to be dropping Vices and Howling Mines and everything very early game. But although I really like that deck and it's very fun to play, I really wanted to try out the Turbo Stasis deck, but with Time Vaults. And I've got an updated deck right here, and I've got a sideboard here for you. And both of these are they're both very preliminary. They've only had so much testing, and so there was partially a desire to kind of like make all of you guys wait until I'd really refined them down quite a bit. But the first time I posted my Turbo Stasis deck, way back in like, you know, the 1.0, it was like, I think it was white-blue initially, then it went like mono-blue. The point is, I kept revising it and doing newer videos as I was revising it, so people kind of got to see the progress. And I figured that might be kind of fun to do here. So I'm going to show you what I've got at the moment. I have play tested it some. It's mean as hell, honestly. Once this version locks, it's locked. And I've seen times where it can lock as early as turn 2. I've seen an awful lot of times where it can lock as early as like turn like 3 or 4. That's like, you know, much if it's going to be an early lock, that's much more common unless you just don't get the cards for it. So let me just start actually going through the deck so you guys can actually see it instead of just sitting here jabbing about it, right? Okay. So I'll put myself up in the corner here. Okay, so I'm going to take the sideboard and I'm going to move this off to the side at the moment so we can just go through the main deck. Okay, so like you might expect, initially we've got 4 copies of Stasis. Now I know I don't have English versions here, so I'll explain real quick to you guys what this is. Stasis is the 1 blue, 1 colorless enchantment that says every upkeep you have to pay, the person who owns the Stasis has to pay 1 blue mana, or the Stasis actually gets destroyed. And effectively, nobody gets to have an untap step. And so since you don't get to untap, every turn having to pay that blue gets kind of difficult, so that just keeps everything locked down. And that's really the main key of the deck. Now, I noticed a while ago that Time Vault actually had a massively awesome interaction. Oh, so by the way, sorry. This is my unlimited Time Vault. This is a collector's edition Time Vault. This is a proxy, and I've got my other 2 unlimiteds are still sitting here in cases that I just got. So I've got them. They're in plastic at the moment, and I just freed this one in a video. I don't know if I'm going to release or not. I don't know if you guys would find it fun. Anyways, so Stasis and Time Vault have this amazing interaction because Stasis has that upkeep, and what happens is when you first play Time Vault, it's tapped. And then what you can do is you can skip a turn to untap it. And then later on, at any point, as an instant effect, you can tap it and take another turn. Well, when you have a Stasis in play, then what happens is you have these Time Vaults tapped, and every time you want to skip a turn, you just untap Time Vaults. And in the meantime, your opponents aren't getting untapped phases either. And then eventually, you could start paying that upkeep on Stasis, or you could just let the Stasis just go away. And then now you can start tapping these Time Vaults and get all these turns back. So there is a massive natural synergy between the Time Vaults and the Stasis. And most people know that. And that's why they assumed, many people, there would be that Stasis and Time Vault deck interaction would probably be going on. Now, I actually went for 4 Twiddles. Since I've actually got multiple time vaults, getting a Twiddle and then getting to take a whole extra turn is just that much easier now that you got all these time vaults. So unrestricted time vault really unleashed the fury of extra Twiddles in the deck is the way I'd describe it. And Twiddle is also just a good card for Stasis in general, because if they play something and they're going to smack you in the face with it, or say they're going to play that Black Lotus and you don't want them to be able to use it, you can lock it down right at that moment. So they have like that second to use it or just forget it. So Twiddle's really good for locking people down, and it also happens to be a 1 blue time walk once you've got time vaults in play, which happens really often with this deck. Now, some of you might be surprised at this. I actually did go back to white, and I put Kismets back in there. I only got 2, but I did actually put them back in. Now, my reasoning for doing this is I'm not going like into uber defensive strategy, because I didn't want to go down that traditional Stasis slow play, games take forever strategy. This is still an aggressive Stasis deck. The difference is that when I get a Kismet in play now, I'm still going for the aggression, but once I play that Kismet, the game almost every time is just over. I mean, when I've got a Stasis out and a Kismet and they're not even getting to use the mana sources and the creatures that they're putting out, it's very rare that my opponent is able to like win the game at that point. So that's just kind of to have a hard lock on the play field. Now, so that's the main pieces of the combo of the deck. Now I'll talk about some of these other interactions. I'm going to get into some defensive spells now. We got 3 Boomerangs. Notice I don't have 4. Now this one's tough. This is, like I said, this is an early version of Stasis, and this actually might play back and forth. I might add that 4th Boomerang back in, or I might actually choose just to keep it out. And the reason is that there's not a lot of slots in this deck. It's hard to squeeze everything in that I'm trying to do. And I've definitely ran into times where if I'm going for like an aggressive quick lock, when I draw top deck that additional Boomerang, all it does is buy me like maybe 1 more turn or maybe a little bit less damage, but what I really needed was like a lock piece or something to shut them off. So I went for 3 Boomerangs at the moment, but that could actually change. Now here's a big surprise. Those Paralyzes. What, Edwin? You're doing 3 colors in your Stasis deck? Yeah, I am. 3 colors. And I opted for Paralyze because Paralyze comes out very cheap. Only for 1 black, you can lock down a creature. Now, there's an effect on Paralyze I love. Sure, it'd be great to just remove the creature. I've got white, so why not just Swords to Plowshares it? But remember, I'm playing an aggressive deck, right? Think of this kind of like a lightning bolt deck, you know, where you really don't want to give them life. You know, you want to control the board, but you want to chew their life down as fast as you possibly can. So I wanted to see, can I get away with Paralyze instead of a Swords to Plowshares? And the thing that I really like about the Paralyze is, sure, they get to like pay 4 and untap their creature, but you know what? There's an awful lot of times where I'm playing Stasis and I want them to actually tap a bunch of mana and lock all their mana out again. And if they play a creature and I paralyze it, and then they untap for 4 and they hit me with it, half the time it's honestly worth it for them to hit me again with it just to lock that mana down. Especially because if I don't have a Kismet in play and I'm not able to lock down all their new mana that they're playing, if I'm Howling Mine giving them all these cards, and then they drop a land and then 3 Moxes, then they've got an awful lot of mana, right? And so the Paralyze helps because they're going to spend that artifact mana into untapping that 1 creature to try to hit me with it again, which of course I might just Boomerang or something, right? So I'm playing with the Paralyzes right now, and so far I've really liked how they came out because they're so fast to hit. And late game, the opponent is really put in a tough spot whether he wants to untap or not. Because tapping out against Stasis is really, honestly, that's the issue, right? Let's put these aside. Now, I did want some Disenchants in there because I am playing white. I've only got room for 2 of them main deck. I did not go 4. Again, similar reasons, because this is an aggressive Stasis deck. I'm not trying to sit back and play defensive. So I don't have a lot of those spells. So only 2 Disenchants. And for a very similar reason, I've only got 3 counter spells in the whole deck, right? Only 1 Mana Drain and 2 Power Sinks. Doesn't seem like enough when you first see the list, but once you start playing this deck and you see how it actually comes out, it actually makes sense. And then, of course, the universal removal here, Chaos Orb. So just fantastic card, the best removal in old school, I still say. So yeah, this is kind of my removal in the deck. And like you can see, it's not a lot. This is not built to be a sit back and make a game take forever defensive kind of deck. Okay, now to get those combo pieces out, we've got a Transmute Artifact. And since I've got black now, I've got a Demonic Tutor. So I can go pull out the actual individual cards that I need. And what I find oftentimes is that when I'm transmuting Artifact, I'll actually go for a Howling Mine or another Time Ball. And what I'm oftentimes sacrificing is probably a Mox, because I want all my extra card draw and stuff like that to remain in the deck. Speaking of card draw, very key card in Stasis is Howling Mine. Some people already know this. That is the card to attack when you're you're facing this deck. The problem that people have is if you spend all your artifact removal blowing up my Howling Mines, well, then you're not going to have it for a lot of these other things. So I make my time vaults more safe by giving my opponent more artifact targets than he can actually deal with. And so generally speaking, the Howling Mines end up being safe because it's like they can't die to that Black Vise. They got to get it off the table. And they don't want me to take in like extra time vault turns. And so if they blow up all my Howling Mines and I get all these time vaults and I just start twiddling and taking extra turns, it's really bad for them. So I put them in a really tough spot. So also we need the draw. I've got the Ancestral and the Timetwister. The Timetwister is very important in the deck. The Ancestral, I don't need to explain it. Draw 3, great. Everyone likes that. Everyone understands that. Twister is very important. Just because Timetwister is in this deck means that I can play it out very aggressively. I don't have to sit back and try to wait for the perfect time for a lot of the cards, because since I got that twist in the deck and maybe even a tutor to go get it, once there's some form of lock established or some form of board control, I can go Timetwister, get all of those key spells back, and then just have them available to replay again. And now I'm all the way down to the actual kill cards, and it might surprise you guys that I've only got 3. I've only got 3 Black Vises. So previous Turbo Stasis builds I had, I was playing with 4 Black Vises. What I noticed very often is I would have a starting hand with 2 Black Vises and some mana, and I would drop those 2 Black Vises and just hammer my opponent down to 12 life or something decently low. But then it's I didn't draw anything to lock them down. I didn't draw anything to combat what they're doing. And they were able to finally empty their hand. And then I'm sitting there with a halfway empty hand myself. And then it doesn't turn out well. The Black Vises are actually intended to be your kill card. And once you got things set up, and you've got your Howling Mines, you've got your draw and stuff, you're going to get the Vises. So I've discovered I can definitely shrink down the number of Black Vises and just be perfectly fine with the deck. So that's the deck. Those are the main pieces to it. And now let me go over the mana base. So I do still have lots of basics in here, but not as many as before because there's 3 colors now. So there is my 3 basic lands, my 3 islands, I should say. And I do have 1 plains in there. And that's in there, honestly, for Blood Moon, like you guys might imagine. If somebody plays a Blood Moon against me, I really need to get it off the table. So I do have a plains in the deck. But only 1, because I need that blue incredibly badly. And I need the other colors very badly as well. And so I still do the same trick with Mishra's Factories, only 2 Mishra's Factories. And they're not in there to be aggressive, they're in there for blocking. If things are not going well and I'm having creatures facing me down and I just gotta buy time until I can get to my lock pieces, Mishra's Factories, that's what they're for. Occasionally they might swing through for a win, but usually not the case. So let's move these aside and go over the multicolor cards. So like you would imagine, there's a full set of the proper color dual lands. So a full set of Underground Seas and a full set of Tundras. And I do actually have 3 Cities of Brass. I just want to make sure I have access to that black or that white mana when I actually need it. So those all had to go in. No one's surprised by that, I'm sure. And now the last mana sources, the most important moxes, the most important artifact mana, of course, the on-color moxes. And it's really a mix-up between whether or not the black or the white is more important. That depends on the deck you're going against. If it's a creature deck, it's going to be the black. If you're playing against a deck with artifacts and stuff, it's probably going to be the white. But the most important is definitely the Sapphire, of course, the blue Mox. Now, the next most important, I'd say, is probably the Soul Ring, just because you can turn one, you know, put out your land and then your Soul Ring and then get out into that Time Vault or hopefully that Howling Mine. That's like the best start, is a Howling Mine. Then probably the Lotus. It gives you speed, but it goes away so quickly, so I'd actually even put it behind the value of the Howling Mine. And then finally the last two off-color Moxes that don't fit the deck, but help you speed out those early artifacts and keep that aggressiveness on it. So that's the mana base for the deck. Now, okay, for the starting sideboard, and notice I say starting because this is very preliminary. I haven't tested this a ton. So we got to get some extra removal in. So I've got a City in a Bottle here in case I go against like a rug deck, a very heavy Arabian Nights style deck, and I don't want to put something out I don't have to keep paying for. I've got that. If I go against creature anything, I've got 2 Tabernacle of Pendrell Veils and fantastic creature removal, especially in a Stasis build. There's a lot of times where I'll drop a Stasis and then a Tabernacle, and it's like they just lose all their creatures, right? Because they didn't have any mana to pay the upkeep with. So fantastic play. Those are definitely in there. In case I need them, these are sitting in the sideboard at the moment. I do have 2 Swords to Plowshares. These might come out as I'm continuing to play test and either be substituted for some other removal, like maybe an Abyss, maybe more Paralyzes. We'll have to see how that actually goes. I did put the Disenchants into the sideboard, so I can have a full set of 4 Disenchants. Those are just fantastic cards. If I run up against like a deck like The Deck or something very artifact enchantment based, I'm probably going to need those because my Boomerangs and my 2 Disenchants aren't going to be enough. To help with the creature decks, something low and fast, I do have a couple Moats. They're on color. They can shut another deck down cold. I was on the fence whether or not to try to put more Tabernacles in or more Plows. We'll have to see how those Moats are actually needed and what good they do. I do have 2 Blue Elemental Blasts in there. Get the cards down there so you guys can actually see them. I didn't do a ton of Blue Elemental Blasts. I might end up at some point maybe cutting down my Moats and putting more Blue Elemental Blasts in there. I do have 2 Hurkyl's Recalls, and I love the way that this card actually comes out. There's a couple amazing situations, like let's say I'm going to like cast a Timetwister, or my opponent is going to, or either one of us is, or in this case they're going to cast like a Wheel of Fortune. You know, you hit them with that Hurkyl's Recall and all their artifacts come back up into their hand and then just get discarded. That's one awesome play. Another one is like, let's say we're battling back and forth. They've finally squeaked out some Moxes and other things on their side, and I drop a couple Black Vices on them and Hurkyl's Recall, and now all those artifacts come into their hand and then they take all that Black Vice damage. That's pretty big. Another one is they play like maybe Energy Flux against me, and I just pull all my artifacts back and deal with the Energy Flux and then set them all back out again. Lots of amazing plays with those Hurkyls. And then the last ones in the sideboard are 2 Reconstructions. And these will go in probably if I play like another counter deck, because what happens is, you know, I'll put out, you know, like a Time Vault or a Howling Mine or a Chaos Orb or something, and then either I use the Chaos Orb or they disenchant one of my artifacts, and the Reconstruction just pulls that sucker right back, and then I get to replay it again. Very cheap, easy to set it out again. So it's a great card. In fact, Reconstruction has often been so important for what I'm actually going for. More often than not, it sucks down a counterspell out of their hand, because like they really don't want me to get that Chaos Orb back or replay that Howling Mine or whatever it is. So oftentimes this will suck down a counterspell, which is fantastic, right? I want them to be counterspelling things that are more easily let goable for me. So that's it. That's the actual sideboard and the deck as it exists right now. And this is May 31st. That is all the cards that are in it at the moment. Now, I'm sure many of you are starting to ask, well, Edwin, what about this card? What about that card? There's all these cards everyone has, and they say, always when I play like a deck tech, where I'm going over a deck like Stasis, everyone has their favorite pet cards. Edwin, why didn't you use this? Okay, so I've got a stack of those cards, and let me do a quick mention for each of these why I didn't put them in here. But, you know, some of them are still worth considering, but they're not in the build at the moment. So let's go over those. Grab this window and move this back. Okay. So for Sarah Angel, Guardian Beast, and Control Magic, and Time Elemental, these guys, they're not in the deck at the moment because they're all creatures. And if you think about my build, I'm basically creatureless, except for the factories, but I might not even activate those. As soon as I put a creature in my deck, all these cards that for my opponent were fairly dead cards, like the Abyss, Swords to Plowshares, Lightning Bolts, Fireballs, you know, that weren't going to help them in those situations, suddenly become good cards. So that's the main reason, even though these are good creatures, and many of them very much fit the strategy, like Sarah Angel, all these guys, they very much fit the strategy. But I don't want to give my opponent good cards. I want the dead cards in their hand to remain dead cards, and that's why none of those creatures are actually in the deck. Now, in terms of like battles over mana, I've got all of these guys. Now the Strip Mine, I don't have a Strip Mine in the deck, and I've gone that direction because, well, it's Stasis, you guys. Like I can get by without a Strip Mine with a Stasis deck, because a lot of times, you know, whatever abusive land that they've got, it just gets locked down by Stasis anyway. So that's okay. I don't necessarily need that. Land tax doesn't work for me because I don't have enough basic lands. I could play more basic lands if I actually played a land tax, because I could, you know, like pull them out of the deck and then make good use of drawing more efficiently. That's possible. But the advantage that you gain from that is not as good as the advantage I gain from the cards that are already in it. And that's an important deck design strategy to really understand. It's not for a lot of these cards that card doesn't fit the strategy. It's, is it better than everything else you've got in there? And for land tax, I think the answer is no. Fellwar Stone, in the right metagame, I think Fellwar would be very good, because if it gets me the colors that I need, it's better than those off-color Moxes many times, because I've got the mana to play them. And if I could get colors that I need, then, well, that's fantastic, right? But there are many times where my opponent is not necessarily playing the colors that I need them to play. What I really want is for them to have the colors that I need, and that's where Fellwar Stone shines, right? If I'm going to go up against a field and they're all playing red-green decks or something like that, it's no use at all. So by default, I keep it out, but it's worth considering. Nether Void is a big one to consider. This one makes everything cost 3 more, and I'm sure there's places where that would really be fantastic for a Stasis build, because you would just make it so hard for them to play. Now, the reason why I don't play this is because my version of Turbo Stasis, it's not a defensive one, which might have up to like 30 mana sources. My build only has like 24 to 26 mana sources, much lower. And so I'm not going to draw mana as fast as a lot of other opponents might. So I could actually hurt myself more with that Nether Void, and that's why I didn't play it. Icy Manipulator, great card. There's always a debate whether or not Icy is better than Twiddle, because you get to use Icy every single turn. And it's in a long game with more mana available, I think Icy is better. In a deck like mine that's meant to be more aggressive, and where I really want to surprise people, because there's no surprise factor to Icy. You play the Icy and they know what options you got on the table. With a Twiddle, they have no idea. And if I'm packing multiple Twiddles, my opponent is always on edge. He's always a little bit iffy on if is it the right way to do things. Does he need to keep counter magic ready? He can't disenchant my Twiddle, right? There's a different mix there. In my build, Twiddle is better, and so Icy stays out. Now for creature removal, or additional creature removal, I do have a Balance as one of the cards that's not in there. Up until this last version that I built, Balance was in there, but I'm playing so aggressive. Balance is a come from behind control card. If it was a more control Stasis deck, Balance would be better, because I'd battle with the person and then use Balance to clean the board, and then I would lock everything down. But mine doesn't play like that. It's too aggressive. Same thing with the Abyss. Fantastic removal card, but it's slow, right? I mean, if they have enough creatures, oftentimes they get to still smack you in the face if they're facing down an Abyss. So there are situations where I think this could be very good, very useful. My current testing said no, not as useful for a deck that's as aggressive as mine. Dust to Dust is a really good card that this could easily go into my sideboard. If I face down a lot of artifact decks, this one's good enough that it could easily land into the sideboard. Winter Orb is a big one that I had in my version of Stasis. And if I was to really simply explain what Winter Orb meant in my earlier Turbo Stasis decks, Winter Orb was like a poor man's Stasis. Like if I had a game start and I didn't draw like a Stasis or a Howling Mine, a Winter Orb was like maybe the next best thing because I could keep them slowed down enough until I could go get those Howling Mines to dig deeper or go get a Stasis to lock the board down. Now with Time Vaults and multiple Twiddles, the ability to take all these extra turns has made it such that I don't need extra cards to keep delaying the game. I can get there much faster, therefore I don't need a poor man's Stasis. Brain Geyser, it's 2 mana intensive. I rarely have that amount of mana open, and if I do, things aren't going very well. Copy Artifact, this could very easily land in the deck because it's so versatile. It could be, you know, that 5th, 6th copy of Time Vault. It could be additional Howling Mines. I could easily see this one still going into the deck. Very possible. Very highly ranked. And yeah, could go in on a list. Recall, a little bit too mana intensive. Reconstruction works because it's just so cheap. With Recall, I'm probably either going to want at least 3, if not 5 mana to be spent on it. And I normally don't have that amount of mana open when I'm being very aggressive. Mirror Universe in previous Stasis builds has been a great card. In this build, it's just a little bit too expensive. It's above the curve I'm trying to go for, so it doesn't fit. Reset worked fantastic in my earlier Turbo Stasis deck. Doesn't work as well in this one because it basically got shoved out, so I can make sure to have all those Time Vaults and Twiddles in there. This Reset's one of the cards that just got knocked out. Ivory Tower is another fantastic card. It's definitely tier 1 in my build of Stasis. It could land in the list. I mean, there's a fairly short list of cards that are so good that they could very easily land either in the main deck or the sideboard of my Stasis list. And these 3 are some of them. You know, just fantastic for the type of build that I've got going on. So that's it. That's the Temporal Stasis deck. I've now shown you guys. And I probably shouldn't have, because I'm probably going to be playing this deck against some of you guys in either upcoming tournaments or online or something like that. And now you've all had a chance to see my deck. So if you've seen this video, hey, do me the favor, show me your deck. Let's even it out a little bit. But anyways, yeah, I'm very excited about this deck. It's kind of like a little bit more combo-ish than our earlier versions were, and it's amazing how it comes out. And when you get those multiple Time Vaults and you've got Howling Mines out and you're taking extra turns and you're drawing like 3 cards a turn for like 3 turns in a row, and all of a sudden your hand is full again, oh my gosh, it's amazing how it actually comes out. So thanks for watching, guys. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you later.